Hey, everybody, and welcome to Key Conversations for Leaders. I'm your host, John Ryan, and today we have a very special guest, Jude Charles. Jude started his company as a teenager. He is a brand strategist, filmmaker, and speaker. For almost 15 years, he's been helping purpose-driven 7-figure and 8-figure entrepreneurs to bring their stories to life through documentaries and videos. Welcome to the show, Jude.
John, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here as well. And I want to ask you, I know that you help people and just in talking to you a moment ago, that you work with a very selective group of people, like only, 4 to 5 people a year, and you help them tell their stories. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. So I have always been in love with storytelling since the age of 8 years old. As an 8 year old, I wasn't the kid that was outside playing basketball or football. I wasn't even the kid inside playing video games. Instead, I would lock myself in my room after school and I would write stories. I would write so much that I ended up writing books, 11 books in all, 11 100-page books. And these books were what I thought my future life would look like. So at one point, I wanted to be a police officer. So I wrote The Police Life of Jude Charles. Another time, I wrote The Baseball Life of Jude Charles because I had just read the Jackie Robinson story. And I was like, okay, what is it going to be like to be a baseball player? Like, what if I want to do that? But it's just this fascination with what could really happen in the future, right? And so fast forward to I'm 17 years old and I'm in a TV production classroom. Um, and this teacher, Mrs. Donnelly, took a liking to me and she taught me everything that she knew about video production. And then on May 4th, 2006, she looks at me and she says, Jude, you're really talented at this video production thing. I think you should start a business. And at the time, I didn't know anything about starting a business. I was 17 years old. Not only that, I am the youngest of 10 children. My father was a construction worker. My mother worked at a chair factory.
Wow.
So there wasn't any blueprint for that. But the following day, May 5th, 2006, Mrs. Donnelly comes into the classroom and she hands me a yellow envelope. I'm like, what is this? And she's like, open it up, look at it. And when I open the envelope and I look inside were my first set of business cards. May 5th, 2006, I'll never forget the day. That's the day that I became an entrepreneur. That's the day that Mrs. Donnelly gave me the courage to say that you can do this. And there's no reason not to. And so that's what started my journey. Now, the first 5 years of business were brutal because I didn't really understand, again, what it meant to be an entrepreneur, how to sell myself, how to market myself, how to get paid the right amount for the value of work that I was creating. But it wasn't until 2011 um, I woke up to the sounds of chains hitting the floor, 7 a.m. And it jolted me out of bed, and I ran outside because I knew what the sound of chains were. I had heard them before. They were the sounds of a tow truck driver coming to repossess my car for the second time in 8 months.
Hmm.
And, I went outside, I ran outside, I pleaded with him, like, please, please, just don't act like you haven't seen the car. Just give me one more week. Of course, he had a job to do, so he took the car. And I remember walking back inside and I sat on the edge of my bed saying, you know what, I've given it a good 5 years. It's time to, hang it up and say, like, I've tried. I started at 17. I got started early. Didn't know what I was doing. I need to just take a different route here. And about 30 or 40 minutes of just sitting on the edge of my bed, I get a phone call from a client that I had been working with for a year. Her name is Keisha Dior. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to pick this up right now because I'm not in the right headspace to be talking to a client. But for one reason or another, I decided to pick up the phone. And, you know, I can hear Keisha's excitement on the other line. She's like, Jude, you won't believe it. You won't believe it. I'm like, what happened, Keisha? And she's like, I've been doing this business for a year and It's been 12 months and I just got off the phone with my accountant and he's just told me we crossed over the seven-figure mark. So for context, Keisha Dior is running a cosmetic business, selling colored lipstick, blue, purple, green, yellow lipstick. They weren't popular back then. But in 12 months, she was able to take this documentary that I had given her, leverage it, launch her business and leverage it in order to make $1 million, in order to get, a large amount of people to pay her $1 million. And here I am in the same moment struggling for 5 years to make at the very least $20,000 to $30,000 a year. That moment was a light bulb that I need to get out of my own way. There isn't any difference between me and Keisha Dior outside of she understood how to market her product in a way that would get people to buy. And so that started me on the journey of doing documentary series for entrepreneurs. This is what you led to. And I wanted to give you the full background of that, but that's my story. Like, I started as a 17-year-old kid. I struggled for the first 5 years, but ultimately it was because of what I got to see behind the scenes from a client that helped me transition and truly excel in my business almost 15 years later.
So two major signs, right? So Mrs. Donnelly, right? Here's your business cards. You got the equipment. There's no reason not to go forward in this. And then at one of your lowest points, chains are on the ground, the car gets taken away, questioning everything. And then the universe, the world opens up and says, hey, you got something here. You can help people tell their story. And that kept you going. So what did you do next? Like from that point on, did you reposition yourself and refocus, or what was the shift for you at that point?
Yeah, I decided to take a break. I continued working with Keisha Dior because I worked with her for 3 years, but she was the only client that I took at the time. And I decided that I would go back and learn what it means to operate a business, what it means to do marketing and sales. And so I took an online course, and the first online course that I took was a course called Earn 1K. And it's all about, it took me back to the basics because it's all about earning your first $1,000 and then how do you repeat that, right? And the teacher that taught that lesson, he talks about basically how, how to market yourself, how to promote yourself, how to build momentum so that when you do make your first $1,000, you just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. Now, of course, I hadn't made $1,000 at that point, but I hadn't made it, in my opinion, the right way. And that's what I wanted to learn is how do I go back and do this the right way? Positioning was a big part of it. I mentioned that after Keisha's documentary series, I had positioned myself for that here I am, I'm the person that can create stories for entrepreneurs specifically, right? And she was the blueprint. She was the proof that this can work. It was also the time that I had invented road mapping because I went back to, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about road mapping, but I went back to understanding, okay, this documentary helped her make $1 million. Why? Why were people so drawn to her or to her product or whatever it is that they were willing to spend $20, willing to spend $100? Some of them spent $500. Why is that? Right? And that's where I begin to put the pieces together that if I'm going to position myself as the filmmaker for entrepreneurs, the person that can tell their stories, bring their story to life, what's the blueprint for that? Or what, as I like to call it, the roadmap for that. And so that's what I set out to do, is to learn marketing and sales so that I can then continue to build the business the right way. It took a year to do that. I took a year off and I just read a lot of books and I engulfed everything that I could about entrepreneurship. It took me a while to read E-Myth, which was a great book. E-Myth, I didn't read till much later, but that's how I begin to take the steps toward going in the right direction.
Michael Gerber goes right into that repeatable $1,000. You create your system,
Yep.
which is, I imagine, a lot of what the road mapping process is about.
Mhm.
And then you can replicate, you're going to find that unique story.
Right.
Part of it's
Exactly.
structure, but then it's also customizing based on the individual, the company, their story, things like that. Very exciting. Sounds like you really did some really great research because he's definitely a classic for sure. And I want to talk more about messaging in just a minute, but let's take a moment to talk about the medium because it seems I mean, especially right now, the time of this recording, it's pandemic, people are working remotely, and video it has been taking off for a while. You look at the growth of YouTube. YouTube is the number two search engine on the planet right now. What do you really see happening in the marketplace with video and branding and sharing stories?
Yeah, YouTube came out in 2009, I believe. And in 2009, the technology wasn't there for everyone to have a video camera in their hands. By 2015, 16, that's when we started to see more cell phone footage begin to pop up on the internet. I think what's happening now, especially in the moment of 2020, where we're in the midst of coronavirus and we're in the midst of the majority of people are home and we're creating much more content. What's happening is that a very select few entrepreneurs, very select few creatives are breaking through the noise. And they're breaking through the noise because instead of simply sitting in front of the camera and talking, they're showing you what the behind the scenes of their life looks like. And I think that was where the shift in brand and marketing began to change, where bloggers, or what became known as vloggers with a V, begin to create this content that could really show you, instead of just telling you what to do, I could show you what to do. I can give you the experience of allowing you to see it with your own eyes. We're visual creatures, we're visual human beings. That's the way that we learn how to communicate. When we first learned the word cat, we read the word cat, CAT, and then we saw an image of a cat. And so anytime we saw the cat after that, we knew that was a cat, right? The same way with visuals. I think if I tell you about a time that I went to New York and I was mesmerized by the buildings, you see New York buildings in your head, and I see New York buildings in my head, right? Because of something that we've experienced, whether it's a movie or being in New York. And so that's what's happened with video, where Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube have all created their own video platforms. Why is that? Because they're engaging, because they allow us to experience in a much different way than words. Words are important, but when you can watch a video that you can hear, that you can see, that you can feel, it changes everything, right? And I think we talked about in the beginning of this Keisha Dior's documentary. Part of it was that it was being able to see, hear, feel what she was talking about, because what she talked about was not about the color lipstick and how beautiful they are. She talked about women empowerment. She talked about being comfortable in your own skin, right? If you wanted to go out that day and wear blue lipstick, go out and wear blue lipstick. And then she shows you how she does it herself, right? That is the magic of video now in 2020, where, and I mentioned like there's people breaking through because there is a lot of noise out there, but there's people breaking through because they're creating content in a much different way that gives you a three-dimensional view into their lives. That's where I see video going even 10 years from now, is that people will want to see that, see what life looks like behind the scenes.
People want that. They want that behind the scenes. And the big thing that I was thinking about as then you said it, was the feeling
Yes.
that, like, words, and you talk about writing stories when you're a kid, right? So Jude Charles as a baseball player, as a police officer, but the feeling that comes across and getting that connection with Keisha Dior, because going behind the scenes and showing her out and about wearing bright blue lipstick, because you
Yeah.
can talk about it, but until you see it, say, wow, okay, I connect with her on a personal level. I feel that. And
Right.
so that makes it okay for me. And it versus a written word is not going to communicate that in the same way.
Right.
So
Right.
video's
It's
gonna
not.
yeah. So video is gonna continue to go forward, and people want that access, like, to celebrities, to non-celebrities, to high value content. Is there a specific type of company that should bring you behind the scenes? Or are there some companies where maybe that would not be indicated?
I think, in my opinion, I do not think startup entrepreneurs or startup businesses should focus on video. Why? Because I think there's other things you have to prove that what you're selling, whether it's a product or a service, people actually want it. And while you can do that with video for sure, it takes more time to just get your feet off the ground and do market research and make sure this is what people want. So I usually recommend that an entrepreneur or a business making at least $300,000 in revenue should focus on video, the type of video that we're talking about here today. Now, what I'm talking about specifically is the type of video that tells your story and that goes deep into your story. Is there room for Q&A type of videos, like you sitting in front of a camera? Is there room for how-to videos? For sure. But what we're talking about specifically is storytelling videos. I think storytelling videos are for entrepreneurs that are making at the very least $300,000 that they've proven people are willing to pay them. It's not a fluke. It's not like they had a good year or anything like that. People are willing to pay them money for their product or service. At that point, I believe it's important to begin to stand out from the noise, stand out from the crowd, and truly show how different you are. Because now you have an audience, you have people that have purchased from you, right? And again, we've proven that people want this. So now you can begin to create these other stories that show how did you even get started, right? That shows why are people buying your product so much. So what I call social proof. What do other people have to say about you? Showing the transformation. How does someone's life change after they use your product or service? Not just the before and after, which is most people like we've seen in the fitness world where the person may have been 300 pounds and then they lost 150 pounds or whatever. That's the before and after. But how does life change after? Right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that is where I think the kind of entrepreneurs that I'm talking about, 300,000 and above, should be focused. Those are the type of content that I think $300,000 and above. That's the entrepreneur that should be creating that content.
And that content, is there a different level of content when they're just starting out and not producing that kind of results and revenue because they're not market tested that they should be doing?
Yeah, I think there's how-to videos. So showing that you're an expert in your field, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there are Q&A. Like, let's say you get people that give you pushback, and there's a specific type of objection that someone's giving you, kind of like, this costs too much, or will this work for me, or should I be doing this right now? Why should I do this right now versus doing something else right now? Those are great Q&A videos that you can do just to show that you're the expert in your field, just to get people to begin to trust you, right? I think those type of videos. Every video has its place, and it's just understanding how to use the video effectively for where you are right now.
So there's phases, it sounds like. So like
Yeah,
phase 0 to 1 is like getting started, establishing yourself as a brand
right.
and building brand awareness. But once you have that proven model, like you said, $300,000 and above, now people want to know a little bit more behind the scenes. And that's where a deeper level of storytelling, the social proof, and telling the success stories, not just the before and after, but how is their life, how has their business been impacted, how that really opens up.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I think, if we talk about what I like to do with my clients is road mapping. Let's get really clear on before you even get started, let's get really clear on where is this even going. In the same way that you cannot build a house without a blueprint, you cannot create videos without a roadmap. And so really quick, I want to talk about what's in a roadmap and why it's important to build that before you ever get started. In a roadmap are three phases. It's what I call dramatic clarity, the first phase, dramatic demonstration, that's phase number 2, and then dramatic leverage. Dramatic clarity is all about understanding who you are, what your brand's about, what do you stand for, what do you stand against, what are your philosophies, what are your core beliefs. Getting really clear on that, right? So let's say hypothetically your core value is integrity, because that's one that a lot of people like to use. We have a lot of integrity, right? Well, what does that look like? What does that feel like? That's where dramatic demonstration comes in. So you said all these things in dramatic clarity. We really care. A really good example that I talked about on the podcast recently is that for a pest control person, if you say you really care for family, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Why do you care for family? Right? Why do you care about protecting the home from insects or from lizards or from rats? Like, why do you care? And if you say it's about family, in dramatic demonstration, show me the behind the scenes of your family. Maybe you have 3 children and you don't want an insect to be crawling in their bed at night, right? Like, that's dramatic demonstration. It's going very deep and showing and not just telling. We started with telling, but now let's show. So you can show that through 5 different ways, what I call behind the scenes, live illustration, social proof, transformation, and unique mechanism. There's those 5 different ways. And then dramatic leverage. So now you've created the story, you've created the content. Dramatic leverage is how do we make sure the right people see it at the right time? And they see it over and over and over. The reason that I mentioned that Keisha Dior was able to make $1 million after 12 months is because she took this documentary series that I had created for her and she looked at all the different ways that she could just continue to share this documentary, even if it was just one new person that saw it. She did this for years. As a matter of fact, we created the document. We started in 2010. As of 2017, she was still promoting this documentary series. Although she's created other content, although she's had a reality show, she's still promoting the documentary series, right? So that's the roadmap. It's not let's just say, oh, let's just create a cool video because we need to create a video because we're being told video is the next thing we need to create that. Let's get really clear on what we're creating and what we're creating, why we're creating it, and then how we're going to make sure people see it. Because the worst thing that could happen is that you upload your video to YouTube and only 20 people see it, right? You want to make sure that people are engaging with it, they're seeing it, and you're getting the most leverage out of the content you created. In my opinion, entrepreneurs are always on the next shiny object. Like what I often say, they're searching for silver when they have gold in their hands. Once you've created the gold, how do you make sure to leverage that gold for years to come?
And that's the thing, because once you really have that, if you're getting sucked into the next shiny object, you're not really leveraging it. It sounds like Keisha, 7 years later, maybe even still to this day, is still using portions of that. And that's the importance of the high quality.
Yes.
Because you come in and you're putting in that time and energy through the road mapping process. What are your as you said, the qualities that you have that you want to show, like integrity? What are one of the 5 ways or multiples of that, and then how are you going to get that out there? You can use that over and over again, because if it's high quality, it's evergreen.
And even if you start to do another business, let's say hypothetically, because Keisha did do this, if you decide to go into another business, who you are doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
Because we started with your core values, your philosophies, because we started with the stories that you have, that doesn't change. What changes is the product that you sell, maybe, the service that you sell, maybe, but who you are doesn't change. When Apple started, they started as Apple Computers, right? They sold computers, but then they went into the iPod and then the iPhone and then all these different industries that had, on the surface, they had nothing to do with the computers that Apple started with. But because Apple started with the idea that we want to challenge the status quo, that changed everything. It doesn't matter what they create, because what they create still goes back to their core beliefs and it goes back to their core values and it goes back to their philosophies. When they can change industries like music and health and the phone industry, right? Like, it's because of their core values. Who they are never changed, just the products that they sell.
It's like Simon Sinek starting with
Oh yeah,
why.
absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I knew you'd be on all over that too. There you go.
Well, in road mapping, that's what I start with. So I start by showing the Simon Sinek video. You start with why.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
You start with why. Because I think entrepreneurs, they spend a lot of time talking about what they do, which is exactly what Simon Sinek talks about. We talk about what we do, but why we do it isn't talked about. And part of why we do it is because of who we are, right? Because that's who I'm looking to show. I'm looking to show you authentically, in an authentic light. I'm looking to show who you are so that people feel deeply connected to you. That creates the know, like, and trust bridge, right? It takes it from a person that's skeptical, they've never heard of you, and they don't know if you can really help them out. It takes them from that point to they walk across this bridge or they're seeing the content, and then finally they trust you, and they're like, how I'd be silly not to work with him, right? So yeah, it starts with why, and in my opinion, why starts with who.
Perfect. Perfect. And I like that because if you can pivot, like Apple's pivoted, like Keisha's pivoted, and because who you are doesn't change. That's the timeless. That's the gold. Work with the gold, and you can use that over and over and again. So if I'm a business owner of a certain size, or I'm a leader in a company that maybe I'm not the owner of the company, but rising or an executive level, is it important for me to create a YouTube channel and promote my own brand, or am I promoting the larger brand, or maybe I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering, like, yeah, does that come into everyone's world?
In my opinion, it does. I think we are all living, breathing personal brands. Whether you are a professional that works under a major corporation or you are the executive at the top, I think everyone is a personal brand. Now, whether or not you create a YouTube page, that's up to you. But what I do believe is that you should have a video that tells your story about who you are. Why is that? Every brand or corporation is made up of people, and every person has a story. And it's the stories that we have that makes this brand or corporation much more relatable, much more humanistic, right? And so, in my opinion, every person should have a video that tells their story about where are you from? How did you end up here? What is the moment in your life that made you realize this thing that you're doing right now is a part of your purpose? We talked a little bit about, I think this was off camera, we talked a little bit about how, I don't focus too much on the technical side of video production. I focus on the storytelling, and I focus um, on, on the leadership, and I focus on other things outside of just creating video. The reason that is because the video is just the tool, it's just the end product. But what makes that video relatable, emotional, it makes you feel more trustworthy towards the person is because of what we put in the video. And I think that when you're looking for the next job, or you're looking for uh, uh, your team to be inspired and motivated so that they want to follow you, it's because of the stories that you tell. It's because of being able to relay that point to them through video, right? I think that is every person, every human being should be creating video for themselves.
And I think you've kind of already discussed on really where you start, because it's not even from your perspective as a professional filmmaker, it's
Hmm.
not necessarily about having, the highest, most expensive camera on the planet. It's really about the the story and knowing who you are, why you do what you do, knowing where you came from and telling that in there. Does it make sense for people to not invest in a high level equipment if they're doing it themselves at this point in time, or is an iPhone sufficient, or should they upgrade to some higher level stuff, or where does that make sense?
Yeah, I think an iPhone is sufficient. The iPhone or any phone, smartphone that you have, is the most powerful tool that you can have. Simply because even if you were a hire a film production crew like myself, there's still so much content that we're not able to capture. And in my opinion, I think people should be documenting everything. Now, of course, not documenting everything that you get lost and just filming everything and that you don't spend time, you're not present. But I think there are moments that have to be captured where it's like, this can be used sometime in the future. I don't know how, I don't know when, but it can be used. Um, and so I think so. One of the great examples of this, I think, is a client that I'm getting ready to work with. He owns a skincare line, and um, with this client, he started his business in 2012, and he has a gold mine. And what I mean by that is, he started in 2012, and he documented everything that he was doing. He started in his apartment, in his condo, and he had all the products in his condo. He was mixing products in his condo. He had a backpack where he was going to show people the products himself. It was just him. Right now, it's a luxury brand. Almost 8 years later, it's a luxury brand. But it started in a condo. It started with him getting his hands dirty. But we have the content for that. You can't fake that,
Mm,
right? I
yeah.
think that is why I would say, in my opinion, until you're ready to have a production crew, to hire a high level production crew, use your phone. It isn't about getting the perfect angle. It isn't about any of that stuff. Just capture it. Because when you can capture it, and I've done this before where I've used my clients' cell phone footage of what they've captured from the past to tell the story, to document the story, to illustrate the story. And so I think for sure, I think every entrepreneur should focus on, or every human being should focus on documenting, because we are in an era where this technology is available. We're also in an era of being able to capture our family's legacies, right? Because sometimes it's not just about business. Sometimes it's just about, let's say hypothetically, you're an entrepreneur that goes from, you know, having nothing to creating $100 million business. How will your grandkids know the story of what you were able to do in an authentic way so that they can replicate it? To me, that's what leadership is about, is preparing the future generation with what we've been able to do. I just so happen to be focused on entrepreneurship, but there's so much more to that, right? And I think it starts with the video camera. It starts with what you already have. I didn't come on here to teach video production or storytelling so that you can hire me. Of course, I would love that. But I think it starts with you wanting to realize like you have a powerful story to share, no matter where you are in your career right now. That's the important piece. And so, yes, to answer your question, that's why I think we start with an iPhone, the very simplest thing. Don't complicate it. Just get started.
I love it. And really, again, you connected to the why even more. It's not just about sharing your story and giving behind the scenes access, but to leave a legacy and to educate your children and their children's children, and then they can connect. Because if you look at our grandparents, we don't know. I mean, we hear a couple stories, but there wasn't video. There's not a lot of audio, if anything, and that's a lost treasure. We are in a world right now where we can actually leave a percentage or replica of what our life was like. It's really cool. That's exciting. So get out there, get equipment, whether it's your cell phone or something else, it doesn't really matter. It's tell the story. And it sounds like that raw iPhone footage, Android footage, actually sounds like it's useful for creating even more intimate behind the scenes stuff because it's actually lower quality.
I wish I would have started with this because I want people to really understand you can do this today. This is not something that is hard. And the reason that I'm saying that is because storytelling has been confused a little bit over the years. It's become a buzzword, and I think people have complicated it, and they've created structures, and they've created, the hero's journey. All of that is important. But here's the thing: for you to be able to do this tomorrow, and why I'm saying pull out your camera and record now. Here's what a story is. A story is about a very specific moment in time. That's it, right? When you say Jude Charles is a filmmaker, it's not my story. But if I bring you into the moment that I was 17 years old, May 5th, 2006, and Mrs. Donnelly brought in the yellow envelope with the business cards in them, it's about a very specific moment in time that I brought you into. So when we talk about capturing video content, it's about capturing moments. Those moments tell stories because there's a beginning, middle, and end, right? And you talked about like our grandparents and the stories that they would tell us. Of course, there's stories that I've heard over the years, but when you can see it with your own eyes, hearing something said 1,000 times is not as convincing as seeing it once. I'll say that one more time. Hearing something said 1,000 times is not as convincing as seeing it once. We can hear the stories that our grandparents have told us. We can hear the stories that our parents are even telling us. If we can see what they really had to go through, if we can see what it meant to hypothetically be able to be there on the March on Washington when Dr. Martin Luther King gave his speech, If we can see that with our own eyes and feel the energy, there's certain things you can't replicate. And that's what video helps you do. It helps you to replicate the moment. The moment is the story. And that's what you need to focus on, is the moment. And if you focus on the moment, you capture that moment, there's just so much more that you can do with it, which goes into dramatic leverage, right? Like you talked about a little bit. I mentioned how Keisha used it over and over. There's ways to cut up the video to use it over and over. But it's just one piece of content, right? Creating the gold, creating the legacy, creating the stories that continue to help others.
I can appreciate that because, the old, and it sounds cliche, but picture's worth a thousand words. And well, videos, 24 frames a second, 30, depending on your frame rate right there. And at the same time, not all stories are persuasive. And I love that you're lowering the bar and saying, hey, it's just a moment in time. Don't worry about being persuasive. But part of what you do as well is creating that compelling story, which is why you focus on the why.
Yes, yeah.
Because the why is the beginning of that. Are there any tips and suggestions you have for making that connection, the know, like, and trust, compelling, persuasive story?
I think that I'll walk you through what I do with my clients on road mapping. What I'm looking to do is connect the dots. I usually start with their origin, and their origin is not the origin of creating the company. The origin is when were they born? What were they doing? What kind of family were they born to? What did they learn growing up? And then going to where they are in their career right now. That is where you can go deeper to connect the dots to really understand why. Because there's usually threads within there. I mentioned for me at 8 years old, I was writing 100-page books. I didn't know that it would lead me to the work that I'm doing now, but it did. One thing I haven't talked about is that, well, I did talk about that. I talked about that growing up, I wanted to be a police officer. But why I wanted to be a police officer is because I would watch these cop drama TV shows with my dad. Those are shows that he loved. And I wanted to spend time with my dad. I'm the youngest of 10. And he was older by the time by the time I was born, he was 48. So he's in his 50s by the time I'm a young kid, right? So I'm spending time with my dad. And I wanted to become a police officer because of it, right? But the reason that I want to become a police officer is because I was fascinated by being a detective. Well, I have still brought that into the work that I do now. I am digging deep for the truth. I'm not allowing you to tell me, oh, well, I'm just doing this because it's what I'm passionate about. Well, why are you passionate? And you might say, well, it's something that just brings me joy. I always get excited when I can help other people. Why do you like helping other people? I get deep, and I go deep because instead of you giving me surface level, instead of just seeing what's on the surface, I want to go beneath that and pull out the evidence that shows this is why, this is your why. Right? One of my clients, the way she likes to say it, I don't know that I say it the same way with my clients, but she says, if your why doesn't make you cry, you don't know why.
Mm.
And I think the essence of what she's getting to is that your why is so emotionally deep that it has to make you cry. Now, I don't know that you always have to cry, but that's the essence of it, right? Like you got to go deep enough to find the compelling story that no one else knows. And that compelling story is what makes someone feel instantly connected to you, right? I think even with my clients, I think even sometimes they don't realize the compelling stories that they have. The client that I mentioned that talks about um, your why has to make you cry, her name is Darnielle, and she's a business coach. And one of the stories that we've created for her is the story about her journey through motherhood, where she's 44 years old now and she still hasn't been able to bear a child. And she's gone through a miscarriage, she's gone through a bad round of IVF, but she's telling the story. She's showing someone what she's doing in her own life to get through this moment. As a business coach, that makes me more connected to her than just her telling me she can help me get my business in order, or she can help me make more money, or she can help me figure out systems and all of that. Like, it's about who she is as a human being. I'd encourage the people that are listening is to watch that story, because I don't want to give it away what she does, but what she does towards the end of that story is inspiring. And that is ultimately what it's all about. It's about going deep enough to find that compelling story. So, how do you find that compelling story? You think about your origins, where you grew up, the transitional moments in your life. So, that's the second thing, transitions. Um, and then you just think about those very specific moments that just maybe it just changed your mind about everything. My father unfortunately passed away in 2014. And um, for me, as the youngest of 10 children, I was asked to give his eulogy. That moment changed everything for me because it helped me understand my purpose. And I realized my purpose is not in telling, it's in telling stories, sorry. It's not in holding a video camera. It's in telling stories. It's in leadership. My family saw something in me that almost I didn't even see in myself. The fact that they trusted me to lead them through this moment. The youngest of 10 children, right? It's those specific moments that completely changes everything. The only reason I'm on a podcast with you today is because of that moment.
What shifted for you?
What shifted was that I never saw myself in a leadership position because I was always at the lowest level, right? I think the other thing is that I always ran away from leadership because I only saw leadership as the president or pastor of a church or CEO of a major corporation. But when I looked up, so when my father died and my family asked me to do this, and I went on this journey of leadership and just really trying to understand it, I looked up the word lead, Lead. And to lead just simply means to guide a group of people. It doesn't mean you're at the front, right? It just means you're guiding them through whatever it is, whether it's through a corporation, whether it's through hard times, whatever it is. And I think that was a light bulb for me because then I started to connect the dots that anytime my friends were in trouble or anytime they needed advice, they would come to me and say, "Hey, what should I do here?" And I was like, all this time I've been leading people. All this time I've been sharing stories and sharing my wisdom at that age of what they should do. And then here's my family asking me, because it was hard for me to, of course, I lost my father. As a man, I lost my father. And it was hard for me, but here's my family asking me to lead them through this journey and trusting me to lead them through this journey, right?
Yeah.
That is what shifted and made me realize, even with my clients are looking to me to help them shape their story in road mapping. They're looking to me to say, okay, is this a good story? Is this something I could really share with others? Is it going to create more impact? And when I can do that for my clients, I can lead them through their stories. Now I'm creating a greater impact in other people that I will never meet, right? Because I've helped my client do that. I've led my client who's a leader. I've led them to lead others. And I never thought about it in that way until that moment when my father passed away. Yeah, because he was always in my opinion, I said this in his eulogy, he was always the quiet rock of his family. He wasn't loud spoken, but when he spoke, it mattered. And he was everyone centered around him. He wasn't the oldest and he wasn't the youngest either, but everyone centered around him. And he was the quiet rock, not only of our immediate family, like his children, but his siblings, right? And I think that's when I begin to realize, and I often say, it sounds crazy to say this, but I often say my father had to pass away in order for me to understand my own purpose. Because that moment of asking him to do of asking me to do the eulogy would have never happened without that. And then that moment of me going to figure out, what is leadership? What does it mean to lead? What is it? How does this look like? Why am I being asked to give a eulogy? All those things had to happen. Like he had to pass away in order for all those things to happen. So overall, it's about a very specific moment in time, but it changed everything. And that's why I mention it, is because it's about your origin, transformational moments, or very, very specific moments that, just it allowed other things to happen. That's where to look, find these compelling stories. We as human beings are compelling. Every single human being on this earth has a story. From the moment you're born, even beyond the moment that you die, your story still carries on. So everyone has a story. Go out and find it. How do you do it again? I just want to repeat it. You look at your origin. Where were you born? You have something that's unique about where you were born, the family that you were born into, transitional moments, um, moments that you quit a job, moments that you got fired, bad accident, right? Or a very specific moment where I'll tell one last story. I watched a woman. I was at a grocery store and I watched a woman teach her young son. He had to be no more than 5. She was teaching him how to pay his teaching him how to pay taxes based off of what he purchased at the store. So she was teaching him math with real money while in the grocery line. For me, as a person who has not become a parent yet, that inspires me to teach my children the same way
Awesome.
because of that very specific moment, right? It's not a big transitional moment because I didn't have any kids. I still don't have any kids yet, but there's this very specific moment that's changed the way that I think.